Hello everyone, welcome to the video on functional dialog script programming. Auggie is coming along quite well. You can see I have a laser power button on the screen now. This actually turns my laser on and off, just the power supply for it. The test fire circuit properly fires the laser. This morning was my first laser power tests and they passed fine, and the laser burns well with the test control. So it's time for me to move to the final section, which is the augmentation data loading, so that I can cut photographs and such. However, during the process of designing a screen or designing a system for whatever machine you're making, whether it's a chocolate making machine or a coil winder, you're going to want to ask your prospective users for information, calibration, what kind of chocolates they're going to place, the size of a cake it's going to decorate, whatever the machine is meant to do. So to do that, you need dialogues. So I've implemented a system where you can add your own dialogues. There is one on the screen, and way over here on the right you'll see a button that says videos, and this simply runs a scripted dialogue which I've added to the system. If I push it, you can see it comes up with the Auggie introduction video, and there's a drop down box here where we can select any of the videos that are on YouTube. And this window is actually pointing to a YouTube video. It's not a local video. Now, any of these dialogues that you make, you can stretch them to any size that you wish, so that you can watch videos on the screen and follow along, if you wish, with videos that are giving tutorials for doing things like scripting. In order to make a dialogue, it's actually quite simple, and I put two well-documented examples in the library. But let's take a look at making a simple dialogue, just so we get the idea of exactly how it's done before we take a look at the code for those dialogues. Alright, I'm going to use the script box here just as a quick way of testing. If we want to create a dialogue, we simply need to declare a variable for that dialogue. So let's call it myDialog is equal to dialog, and you can see the highlighter brings me to the dialogue so that we know what we're typing is correct. Now, whenever you create a dialogue, you want to set its size. And you do that from then on by using the dialogue that you've created. And in this case, I'm going to set rect. And this sets the size, overall size of any dialogue that you're going to do. But you don't set it in numbers because everybody's screen is a little bit different. So we set it in percentages. So for example, if I want a dialogue which is 25% of the screen in the X and 50% of the screen in the Y, I would put set rect 2550. Now, all dialogues are considered to be 0 to 100% in the X and 0 to 100% in the Y. So you can see here we have that we're telling to make the overall size of the dialogue to 25% and 50% of the screen. Before I add anything to that dialogue, let's turn it on and see what it would look like. And there's two ways to turn on a dialogue. And for those of you who do program in Visual C, this is going to seem very familiar. If you have a dialogue, you can say do modeless or do modal. Do modeless means to run the dialogue in parallel with everything you're doing. And when you run a do modeless, you give it an initialization script, and this is the analog of on-init dialog in Visual Studio. So let's just call it on-init. Now, if the script doesn't exist, it's no problem. The system just won't call it. So you could put none. And in fact, in this example, let's put none to tell it that there is no script to call to initialize things. All we've done is created a dialogue of a certain size and put nothing on it. So if I hit run, you can see we open up our dialogue. It says it has no name because we haven't set one, and there's simply two buttons on the screen, OK, cancel, and there's a close box up top. You can drag and size any of these dialogues, and you can see the controls on them change. Let's give that a title since we have no name at the top. Let's go up here and type myDialog. Set title. And again, you can see that the auto typer takes us close to where we want. So we're going to call this my dialog number 1. That's a pretty simple command, and the good thing about dialogues is you can test them as you go. So now you can see we have my dialog number 1. There is a character at the end of this which I haven't yet managed to eliminate. This is all done through dialog templating. But that will eventually go away. So you can see that all the set title did is just modify the dialog for a title. Now let's say that we want to put something on this dialog. Before you place any control, there's a statement called next position. And this tells the system what is the next item that I'm going to add. How is that going to fit into the dialog? So let's say that we add, we're going to add a combo box or a multi-text edit. Let's give it a position of 5% in on the X, 5% down on the Y, 50% to the right on the X, and 50% down on the Y. Now this statement doesn't do anything except tell the dialog our next item on that dialog will be at that position. And again, these are in percentages, but when you call next position, you're calling the percentages inside the dialog, while setRec takes the percentage of the screen to create the dialog size. Any next position statement simply looks inside the dialog. So here we're telling it to go from 5% in to 50% in on the X, and 5% in on the Y to 50% on the Y. So in other words, about a quarter of the screen. We can then add any type of controls with the add statement, and you can see we have add browser, add button, checkbox, combo box, date and time, all kinds of things to add. Let's add a multi-edit. And when you add a control, you also put a script for the control to call if it has a message, like if something has changed, etc. So you could say this is my script, my edit script, for example. And again, if it doesn't exist, it simply won't be called. You won't be error wrote or trip a fault of any sort. So here we've added my script edit as the script to be called when this new multi-edit control is added to the dialog. Incidentally, we would want to store an identification for that edit control so that we can discuss with the dialog later what to set it to or how to set it. So we can put a variable name there and say my text is equal to my dialog add multi-edit. Now that's pretty simple. Let's run it and test, and you can see that indeed we did get it. The my dialog text edit starts at 5% in on the X and Y and goes to 50% in on the X and Y, so quarter of the screen. And once it's instantiated, you're free to add whatever you like to it. And you can call into this later to get that data. This add multi-script, I just misspoke a second ago. This is actually the text that you're going to put in that as a default text. You don't need to put default text, but you can. Some controls will call back with a script, some won't. For an edit control to call back with a script doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense because you'd end up getting called with every character typed. While a button would have a script that you can call, something like a text edit won't. A slider will, because you might want to keep track when a slider operates and so on. Anyway, this is just a very quick example of how to make a very fast dialog. So now that you're familiar with the way this works, we can take a look at the scripts in the library to see what they do. Whenever I create a dialog, I go with a convention just so that we can always find our dialog. So whenever you see a dialog come from me in the system, it's always going to start with a run underscore starting with a capital R. So in this case, if I type run underscore, you can see I have two of them, run tutorial and run ex dialog. Now the tutorial is what is run when I push the videos button on the screen. And I did that simply by adding a button to the screen with the variable name run tutorial. Since I have a script in the system called run tutorial, the button will call it. Then we have run ex dialog. This is run example dialog. And again, we need to put a function call around it. Now if I call run x dialog, you can see it's a dialog full of controls that you can operate. We have a slider, and you'll notice as I slide the slider, the position update on the text changes. This is not the system doing that. This is a script which is being called back to your scripts by the slider. In the end, every dialog becomes one library file. And let's take a look at that library file so you can get an idea of exactly how hard that dialog, ex dialog, is to implement. So to do that, let's go to our scripter, because it's easier in the scripter to see things. Turn on your scripter, go to the live button, and you can check out under system, you'll see dialog example, and this is where you'll find run ex dialog. So let's local edit that. All right, here we have our complete library file of ex dialog. I'm going to run that again so that we can have it on the screen at the same time as we discuss its code. All right, you'll notice there are no global variables for this dialog. And the dialog itself is global, but it's created inside the function runExDialog. And the first thing we do, and you can see it's all well commented, the first thing we do is check to see if xDialog is made before. If it's already been made and it's open as a window, we exit. So you'll only get one dialog no matter how many times you call it, unless you close it, in which case you can call it again. And that's what this little snippet here does. It says if exDialog is not equal to null, in other words, if it's been instantiated, if it's open, return, because you already have the dialog. So if somebody commands it with run exDialog, it'll simply return because it knows you already have it. If not, we go down and we create a dialog with exDialog is equal to dialog. So we've created a variable exDialog, which represents a system dialog. You can see here I did similar to what we looked at in our quick example. I set the rectangle to 25% of the X screen and 50% of the Y. That seems to be a good size for this particular dialog. And if I hold it up to the screen, you'll see it's 25% of the X and exactly half of the Y. So there's your 25 and 50. Now here you can here's another command for turning system buttons on and off. Any dialog will have two buttons, OK and cancel. They don't have to be there. Since you have an X in the corner, you're free to exit that way. But if you wish to give someone an OK and a cancel, you can simply by saying true on system buttons on off, or don't say anything because they default to on anyway. And you can see we've got comments to tell you what each line is doing. Our next line, we set the position 1, 1, 50, 15. Well, we then add a static frame called radio group. So that's this little box up here that says radio group. It starts at 1% in on the X and the Y. It goes to halfway on the X, which is the 50 and the 1, 150. And then it goes 15% of the way down in the Y, which surrounds this. We then add a couple of radio buttons, and you can see it's just a case of set next position, 5, 5, 23, 14. So I'm staying within inside the box that we created with the radio group, and I add a radio button, and then another radio button. Now radio buttons are much like programming in C. If you, they come with a name, which will be the name in the button itself, radio 1 in this case. You can see the none means this is the name of the script which the system will call when the user presses that button. If it's none, then no script will be called. So you can see I repeated this with several buttons, more static frames. I added a multi-text edit and so on. And we go right down here to adding buttons. So here's the press me button, for example. You can see it's meant to start at 544 and 3049. So 534 is here, 5 over, 44 down, and it goes to 49% down and 30% across. So this is about 1/3, so that sounds right, and halfway down. So as long as you follow your next positions and your add buttons and so on, as long as you format those properly, you can design the screen in any way that you want. It's actually quite simple. You can see this entire dialog starts on this line here, 14, and it's finished by the time we get down to line 99, and most of it is simply comment. You can see there's very few commands that you need to add in order to create that dialog. The last line in the dialog is this: example dialog do modeless, and then we call xDialog init. In Visual Studio, you would have onDialog init, which programs should be used to calling. And the dialog initialization is where you'll add items into combo boxes, set the default positions of sliders, and so on. So you don't have to have one, but if you don't have one, you won't have anything appearing inside your controls, because you can't set something into a control until it's been created, and it's the do modeless command that creates it. So its job is to create the dialog and then call the script xDialog init in order to fill it. Then if we look up here at our slider, you can see that I added a slider at one point. Here it is. Global ex slide 1, example slide 1 is equal to example dialog add slider, and then I give it a script name. And then a group setting, which is true. If you put true as a group on things like sliders, it simply means that they stand alone. If you put group true on a button, it means that is the start of a group until the next time it sees a true. So you can set as many buttons into a group as you want. You can notice as I push a button, the previous button turns off. So anyway, back to what I was saying. We created a variable called xslide1, and we told it that its script was xslide1 script. And that's our next script. You can see I created a global xslide1 script. And this script simply prints on the screen here that the slider is moved, and then it reaches into the dialog and says set edit and sets some text to tell you what the position is. And you can see that operate as I slide it back and forth. We're reading position. Over here on the screen you can see several threads starting and stopping. It's a very short thread run because it's only printing a number, slide 56 in this case, and then sending it here to position 56 because I have position plus the actual position. You can see that the script gets called with pos as its parameter, so that you'll always know where the slider is just simply by virtue of the fact that you've been called. Our next, that's just an example script that I've added in so you can see how callback scripts work. The next one is our xDialogInit function, and this is like on DialogInit in Visual Studio. And here you can see we're simply going through various loops, adding strings into our combo boxes. A little further down here we set the slide min, max, and current to 0, 150. And when we started, our slider was on position 50, and this is why, because we set it to 50 here. If I was to lower this to 10, for example, run that so that it knows that where that is, so that it updates the globals, and then we were to run this script again, you can see that the slider starts at position 10, and that's just because we've changed it to 10 here. So what the slider returns to you as a number of where it is all based on this min, max, and current value that you set. The next one is a script. When you select something in combo box number 1, again let's run that. And you can see I've got a script combo box here, number 1, and if I click on one of them it sets a string up here and it tells you which string was selected, and that's the job of this little global callback function. You can see it's very short, very easy to implement, and yet it takes care of anything being selected by a combo box. Now of course your logic could be huge in here depending on what you want to do with it. For most designers of a screen, you might want to get the user's opinions on how he wants things configured, save them to the profile, and then next time you pull it up, you'd have the proper selections here that your user wanted as defaults. That's it for this script. You can see it's very short. It's only 170 lines long, and probably 3/4 of those are comments. So you can literally create a dialogue which looks that complicated in like 5 minutes work if you get used to how to use the commands. Let's take a look at the video tutorial so that you can get an idea how that works. And again, that's under System. You'll see Tutorials, and I'm going to local edit that, and here it is. And this dialogue for videos is 100 lines long, and most of that, or a lot of that, is text, so it's a very easy one to implement. Let me pull that up so that we can look at it. Okay, so we start this with a global run tutorial function, and run underscore again is what I'll use for every dialogue I make so that you can always find them in the screen just by typing run underscore. If it's open, get out. That's easy enough. We don't want to run it twice. We don't want 2 copies on the screen. So again, we just check to see, is tut dialog null? If it isn't null, is it open? If it is open, go away. So here we create a new one. Global tut dialog is equal to dialog. We set its rectangle, and again I chose 2550 arbitrarily because I like the size of those on my screen. We give it a title, in this case tutorial videos. We decided to turn off the system buttons, the on and off, so I set them to false, and you'll notice there are none down here. I then created a browser window. This is a web browser that you can use not just for YouTube videos. You can actually use it to browse to your home page so that your customers that are using Auggie to control their cake decorating machine or whatever can come and look at your videos and your web page to see exactly how to use what you've created as a controller. I then created, after the browser, I set a position 591, 95, 100, so 5% in, 91% down is the upper corner of this combo box drop down, and the end of it is 95% across and 100% down. So we're using this entire space as a combo box. We then do modeless, and we tell it when we do modeless to go to tut dialog init as its initialization script. In this case, since I have a browser on the screen, I also set a default location as a YouTube location for the Auggie intro. I then told it to zoom. This is a URL zoom command which tells the YouTube screen to zoom to the size of the window I created, because normally if you just open a web page, you'll see that the web page takes up your full screen, but you're just looking at a little window of it. So by using URL zoom, you get to see the entire page in a window. Then I built a little helper function for me. This is just something that sets the URL in tut browser with a string. That means I only have to call a string. And then in the combo, in the initialization function in our dialog init, I told the combo to add all of these items, all these names into the system, an intro, an overview, the jerk example, and so on, just as text strings. The real work comes in on the, you'll see here I created a combo box, and when I did, I called it video selection, but I gave it tut selector as the script to call when it changes. So if we go down here, we're going to find tut selector as our main script, and this is what's doing all the work in the system. And you can see it calls when you change a combo box. For example, when I change this to connecting to a pokies, this function would get called with two parameters. The first parameter is the number from 0 to however many entries of what the user has selected, and the next one is a string variable of what he selected. And you can see here I'm only using the string variable to print a debug message called str, which will tell me what he selected. So you can see when I select something, it says on the screen here, motor tuning. It went by so fast you may not have seen it. Here's one, intro to Auggie, where I started. So this print statement from the str is just to show you how that parameter works. We then have a switch statement on the selection parameter. So it's a number 0 through 13 in this case. So that if the person selects, say, item number 6, it will call this case line and go to that YouTube video. That's it. It's a pretty simple dialogue. There really isn't much in it. You'll notice I have a commented line at the bottom here, run tutorial. And I do that because, of course, I designed this entire dialogue on this screen so that every time I hit run, I ran the dialogue so I could keep adding to it. And the best way to create a dialogue is to add one little thing at a time and keep adding. But these dialogues that I have built in, both run tutorial and run ex dialog, are there for you to read through and get a feeling for how to create dialogues. You can create as many as you want. I advise that you create them so that one file contains the entire dialogue. That way, if you look inside your library, you can create yourself a dialogue library. I'm putting them in systems so that you can find them, dialogue example tutorials, but there's nothing stopping you from adding a library, My Dialogs, and add as many dialogues as you like for your users, and depending on how you're going to work your system. So now that I have laser on off and I'm able to shoot lasers, I'll be working on the importing of images, and very shortly, hopefully, we'll be scanning photographs and doing laser rasters, and we'll go further into the examples then. Alright, that's it for now. Short video, well, relatively short. Have fun.